At 4:06 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of my house cracking, not creaking, not settling cracking. It started as a sharp pop inside the wall behind my bedroom dresser, followed by a long, low groan that moved through the floor like something underneath the house had shifted its weight. My dog, Bailey, jumped off the bed and froze near the doorway. A second later, a thin black line appeared above the baseboard and crawled across the drywall like a vein. By sunrise, the bedroom door would not close. The tile in the hallway had split in a jagged line. The kitchen window was stuck half open. A crack wide enough to slide a coin into had opened along the brick veneer on the back side of my house and behind my fence, where there used to be a protected slope with cedar trees and old ground cover holding the hill in place. A developer excavation crew had spent the previous week digging a 15-foot cut for a row of luxury townhomes. They had carved into the hill behind my property. They had removed the trees. They had stacked soil against my fence, and when my foundation moved, they told me it was probably an old problem I had failed to maintain. By noon, the developer's project manager sent an email saying their site was fully permitted and that construction activity had no causal connection to my home. By dinner, my HOA sent me a violation notice for visible exterior cracking and declining property appearance. 2 days later, the developer's attorney accused me of making false statements that delayed their schedule and demanded $63,500 in damages. My house cracked. Their digging caused it. Then they tried to bill me for complaining. That was when fear turned into something colder, because my house was not just a house. It was the only thing I owned outright after my husband died. It was the place where I had learned to sleep alone again. It was the place I had promised myself I would never lose, and now the wall behind it was moving.
I need to see the temporary
The first
shoring
person I
plan for
called
this
was a
site.
structural engineer. The second was my insurance company. The third was the county building department, but the document that changed everything was already sitting in my closing file, folded behind the old plat map. A recorded slope preservation easement, stamped by the county, attached to my deed, and written in language the developer had apparently hoped no homeowner would ever read. No grading. Excavation, tree removal, retaining structure, or soil disturbance shall occur within the protected slope area without county engineering approval and adjacent property impact review. 3 weeks later, that sentence would be projected on a screen during a county enforcement hearing while the developer's excavation permit was suspended. Emergency shoring was ordered. The HOA withdrew my violation, and the project manager who called my house pre-existing damage watched his $4 million townhome schedule collapse in real time. But that morning, standing barefoot on broken tile, all I knew was that the ground under my home had moved, and the people who moved it were already pretending they had not touched it. I bought the house with my husband, Aaron, 11 years before the cracks appeared. It was not a mansion, it was a modest brick ranch on a quiet street in Willow Bend, a neighborhood built along a gentle hillside outside Knoxville. The front yard was flat enough for kids to ride bikes, but the backyard dropped toward a wooded slope that separated our subdivision from an old commercial parcel below. That slope was the reason Aaron loved the place. He worked as a math teacher, but he had the soul of a man who needed trees around him every evening after dinner. He would stand on the back deck with a cup of coffee and look down through the cedars as if the little strip of woods were a national park. He used to say the hill made the house feel protected, like the world had to climb a little before it could reach us. When we bought the property, the inspector mentioned the slope immediately. He said hillside lots were perfectly fine, as long as drainage was maintained. Trees stayed in place, and nobody cut into the toe of the slope without engineering. The title company also pointed out a recorded slope preservation easement behind the back fence. At the time, it sounded like a boring legal detail, the kind of thing you sign because everyone tells you it is standard. Aaron paid attention. He made copies of everything. The deed, the survey, the easement, the HOA covenants, the inspection report, and the county slope map. He put them in a gray file box in the office and wrote house records on the lid with a black marker. I teased him for it. Years later, after he was gone, that box became one of the last things he did for me. Aaron died suddenly from a heart problem 4 years before the developer arrived. After the funeral, the house felt too large and too quiet, but I could not leave it. Every room held some version of him, the dent in the garage wall, from the time he tried to hang shelves without measuring, the cedar bench he built on the deck, the little stone path he laid from the patio to the herb garden, so I stayed. I worked as a claims coordinator for a regional pharmacy company. I paid the mortgage until the house was mine. I kept the yard clean. I kept the hoa happy. I replaced the roof, repaired the gutters, and hired a contractor to seal a few small hairline cracks in the old garage slab, because I did not ignore maintenance that mattered later. Because when Ridgemark Development bought the commercial parcel below us, the first thing they did was tell everyone their project would improve the area. They planned 12 luxury townhomes on the hillside, each with rooftop decks, glass railings, and price tags higher than anything on our street. The developer, Preston Vale, came to the HOA meeting in a navy blazer and said his team respected the existing neighborhood. He talked about modern drainage, engineered retaining systems, professional geotechnical review, and responsible construction. He said homeowners had nothing to worry about. That sentence has never aged well in any neighborhood meeting. A month later, the trees started coming down, not the trees in my yard. At first, only the ones below the fence on the developer's parcel still. I felt it in my chest every time a cedar fell. The slope looked suddenly exposed, like skin after a bandage is ripped away. Orange fencing went up. Survey stakes appeared. Excavators arrived before dawn. Dump trucks carried soil away one load at a time. Then the ground began to tremble. Not every day. Not enough to knock pictures off walls, just small vibrations that made my coffee ripple in the mug and made Bailey lift her head from the rug. I emailed the HOA and asked whether Ridgemark had provided slope protection plans for the homes above the work area. The HOA manager replied that the project was outside association control and had been reviewed by the county. So I emailed the county permit office. They sent me a link to the project file. I opened the grading plan, the erosion control sheet, and the retaining wall details. Most of it looked technical. But one thing bothered me immediately. The slope preservation easement was shown as a faded boundary line. The excavation limits were drawn dangerously close to it. On paper, there was still a buffer. Behind my fence, it looked like the buffer was disappearing one bucket at a time. I took photos anyway. Not because I knew something would happen. Because Aaron had taught me that documents mattered most when powerful people expected ordinary homeowners not to keep them. The week before my foundation cracked, Ridgemark's crew began digging the deepest section behind my property. The excavation looked wrong from the first morning. The cut was steep, almost vertical in places, with exposed red clay where cedar roots had held soil for decades. A temporary silt fence leaned halfway down the slope. Water from a small spring seeped through the soil and ran toward the trench. Piles of excavated dirt sat near my back fence, pressing against the bottom boards after every rain. I emailed Preston Vale's office with photos. A project assistant replied that all excavation was being performed according to approved plans. The next day, I asked whether shoring had been installed near the property line. No one answered. 2 mornings later, a yellow excavator began hammering at buried rock. Every strike traveled up the hill. The windows rattled. The deck boards vibrated. A hairline crack appeared in the plaster near the laundry room. I photographed it, thinking it was probably nothing. By afternoon, the crack had grown 2 inches. I called the county inspection line. The clerk said she would add my concern to the project file. That night it rained, not a storm, just steady rain, the kind that soaks clay until it gets heavy. Around 4 a.m., the sound woke me, that first sharp pop in the bedroom wall, the long groan under the floor. The hallway tile splitting like ice on a pond. I stood there frozen until Bailey started whining. Then I moved. I took pictures before touching anything, the bedroom crack, the hallway tile, the stuck window, the brick separation outside, the back door frame that suddenly looked slightly out of square. I filmed the slope behind my fence with my phone in the dark. Under the construction lights below, I could see wet soil slumping near the cut. By 7 a.m., I had left messages for my insurance company, the county, and the developer. Preston called back first. He sounded calm in the way people sound calm when they have already decided your emergency is inconvenient. His email followed 10 minutes later. It stated that Ridgemark's work was fully permitted, that no active construction had occurred on my property, and that residential foundations in older hillside neighborhoods often experienced natural settlement unrelated to adjacent development. Natural settlement. My bedroom door had stopped closing overnight. By 10 a.m., a Ridgemark site supervisor appeared behind my fence with 2 workers. They did not come to help. They came to photograph my house from outside the property line. One of them pointed at the old gutters. Another took pictures of the brick crack from an angle that made it look like ordinary aging. That afternoon, Preston sent another email. He wrote that my home appeared to have pre-existing structural deficiencies and that Ridgemark reserved all rights if my complaints interfered with construction financing, inspections, or sales timelines. Then the HOA joined in. Their violation notice said visible cracking, displaced landscaping, and damaged rear fencing were affecting neighborhood appearance standards. I had 14 days to submit a repair plan or face escalating fines. I read the notice while standing in a kitchen where the window no longer opened. That is the kind of moment that makes a person feel smaller than paper. The developer had machines, engineers, attorneys, investors, a county permit number, a sales office with renderings of people drinking wine on rooftop decks. The HOA had violation letters, fines, and a board president who loved saying property values. I had cracked tile, a frightened dog, and a file box my husband had labeled in marker. 2 days later, Ridgemark's attorney sent the letter that made the whole situation feel unreal. It accused me of spreading unsupported allegations, interfering with active construction, and causing delay-related financial damages. It demanded that I stop contacting agencies without evidence and reimburse Ridgemark $63,500 if their retaining wall pour was postponed because of my complaints. That was their strategy. Make the damage look old, make the homeowner look emotional, make the threat expensive enough that silence feels cheaper than truth. For 1 awful hour, it almost worked. I sat at the dining table with the attorney letter in front of me and wondered whether I should just make an insurance claim, repair the damage, and stop fighting people who built projects for a living. Then Bailey scratched at the back door. I opened it and she walked straight to the fence, nose low, ears flat. The grass near the back corner had pulled away from the soil. A narrow gap had opened where the ground used to meet the fence post. Below it, the developer's excavation cut ran like an open wound along the hill. That was not old settlement, that was movement. So I went to the office, pulled Aaron's gray file box from the closet, and opened the lid. If the ground had a story, I was going to find the page they hoped I had lost. The first document I found was the slope preservation easement. It had been recorded when Willow Bend was built, because the hillside behind our homes was considered structurally sensitive. The language was not vague. It did not say the slope should be respected if convenient. It said no excavation, grading, tree removal, retaining structure, or soils disturbance could occur within the protected area without county engineering approval and adjacent property impact review. Adjacent property impact review. I had never received one. No notice, no inspection risk, no pre-construction survey, no letter asking to document existing cracks, no offer to install vibration monitors. Nothing. That was the first problem. The second problem came from my cameras. I had a backyard camera mounted under the deck. It mostly watched Bailey and the back gate, but it also captured part of the slope behind the fence. I pulled footage from the week before the cracks appeared and started reviewing it hour by hour. At first, it was boring. Excavator moving, trucks backing up, workers walking. Dust, dirt, rain. Then I noticed the deck railing. Every time the hydraulic hammer hit rock, the railing vibrated. Not enough to look dramatic in a single frame, but enough that when I zoomed in on the footage, the movement was visible. The timestamp showed the worst vibration the same afternoon the first laundry room crack appeared. Then I checked the footage from the night of the rain. At 3:48 a.m., water began seeping through the exposed cut below my fence. At 4:02, a small section of soil slumped downward near the base of the slope. At 4:06, Bailey lifted her head inside the house, and the bedroom camera captured the sound that had woken me, the house cracking. The camera did not prove everything by itself, but it proved timing. And timing is often the first crack in a lie. I downloaded the raw files, copied them to an external drive, and made a folder called Slope Damage Evidence. Then I photographed every crack with a ruler beside it. I marked each location on a floor plan. I saved weather data from the county rain gauge. I took pictures of the excavation cut from every legal angle I could reach. I recorded video of the seeping water, the slumped soil, the leaning silt fence, and the dirt piled against my fence. Then I called a structural engineer. His name was Howard Mills, and he had inspected hillside homes for 30 years. When he arrived, he did not start by looking at the cracks. He started outside. He walked the rear wall, checked the foundation line, examined the brick separation, looked at the grade near the fence, and stared down at the excavation for a long time without speaking. Inside, he measured the floor slope with a laser level. He checked the stuck doors, cracked tile, drywall displacement, window frames, and foundation exposure. Then he asked when the excavation began. I showed him the timeline. His report took 3 days. It said the damage pattern was consistent with recent differential movement along the rear foundation wall, and that adjacent excavation, vibration, slope disturbance, and water infiltration should be investigated as contributing factors. It did not accuse Ridgemark outright. Engineers rarely do in a first report, but it said enough. My insurance company sent an adjuster the same week. She documented the structural damage. Interior cracks, stuck windows, tile failure, and possible loss of lateral support near the rear slope. She also told me something important. If a third party caused or aggravated the damage, my insurance company could pursue recovery through subrogation. That meant Ridgemark might not only be dealing with me, they might be dealing with my insurer. The next call was to a geotechnical engineer named Dr. Alina Park. She reviewed Howard's report, the slope easement, the construction photos, the permit drawings, and the camera footage. Then she asked for the county project file. I sent her everything I had that night. She emailed back with one sentence that made me sit up straight. The approved grading plan appears to show temporary cut slopes and shoring notes that are not visible in your photographs. I opened the plans again. She was right. The plan showed staged excavation, temporary stabilization, drainage controls, and a notation that shoring was required if excavation approached the protected slope easement. But behind my house, the cut looked open, exposed, wet, unsupported. The public records request went out the next morning. I asked the county for all engineering reviews, inspection notes, shoring approvals, slope stability reports, geotechnical submissions, variance requests, plan revisions, complaint logs, and communications related to Ridgemark's excavation behind my property. Then my attorney entered the story. Her name was Camille Ortiz. She specialized in construction defects and property damage. She reviewed the easement, my photos, the HOA violation, Ridgemark's attorney letter, Howard's report, Dr. Park's notes, and the camera footage. She told me not to repair anything structural until the engineers had documented it. She told me not to speak to Preston. She told me not to let the HOA shame me into cosmetic repairs before the cause was investigated. Then she sent preservation letters to Ridgemark, its excavation contractor, its geotechnical consultant, its civil engineer, the HOA, and the county permitting office. By the next morning, the machines behind my house were silent, not gone. Silent, and silence on a construction site can be louder than any excavator. The county records arrived in pieces. The first batch included plan review comments. The second included inspection logs. The third included emails between Ridgemark's civil engineer, the excavation contractor, and the county engineering reviewer. Most of it was technical: slope ratios, soil classifications, temporary stabilization, drainage discharge, retaining wall sequencing. Then Camille found the sentence: prior to excavation within influence zone of protected slope, applicant shall submit site-specific temporary shoring plan and adjacent property impact documentation. Prior to excavation, not after, not if a homeowner complained. Before, the county had required Ridgemark to submit a site-specific shoring plan before digging near the protected slope area behind my house. But in the permit file, the final approved shoring attachment was missing. There was a general note on the grading plan. There was a retaining wall design for the finished townhomes. There was erosion control paperwork, but there was no site-specific temporary shoring plan for the cut behind my property, no adjacent property impact documentation, no pre-construction condition survey of my home, no vibration monitoring plan. That was the legal term. Ridgemark had not simply dug near my house. They had dug near a protected slope without completing the exact safeguard the county had required. Dr. Park prepared a geotechnical letter explaining the risk in plain English. Removing trees and cutting into the lower slope reduced lateral support. Rain increased soil weight. Vibration from hammering rock could aggravate movement. Without proper temporary shoring and drainage control, the upper residential lots could experience settlement or structural distress. Howard added a supplemental report connecting the timing of my new damage to the excavation sequence, rainfall, and camera footage. Then came the inspection note that broke Ridgemark's defense wide open. A county inspector had visited the site 3 days before my foundation cracked and noted, temporary slope stabilization incomplete behind lots 18 through 22. Contractor advised to install shoring or cease deep excavation pending engineering review. Lot 20 was behind my house. The contractor had been warned, and they kept digging. Camille sent the demand letter that afternoon. It went to Ridgemark Development, the excavation contractor. their civil engineer, their geotechnical consultant, the HOA management company, and the county building department. It included the slope easement, the missing shoring requirement, the inspection warning, the camera footage, the structural report, the geotechnical letter, the rainfall data, the HOA violation, and Ridgemark's 63,500 demand. The letter demanded immediate cessation of excavation near my property, emergency stabilization of the slope, withdrawal of the developer's claim, preservation of all records, payment for engineering costs, temporary housing if the home became unsafe, repair of structural damage, and correction of the HOA violation based on construction-caused conditions. It also notified Ridgemark that my insurer was investigating subrogation. That word had weight. Insurance companies do not get intimidated by blazers, renderings, or threats about schedule delays. Preston's tone changed within 24 hours. His next email did not call my damage pre-existing. It said Ridgemark was reviewing the matter with its consultants. It said all parties wanted to avoid unnecessary escalation. It said construction teams were assessing temporary stabilization options. That sounded careful. Careful is what people become when their first story stops working. But the best evidence came from Ridgemark's own excavation contractor in response to Camille's preservation letter. The contractor produced daily field notes. Most were routine, but one note from the day before the cracking said, "Owner rep directed crew to continue cut behind existing residences to maintain wall schedule. Shoring materials not on site. Monitor slope. Monitor slope." They had no shoring materials. They knew the cut was behind existing residences. They continued anyway to maintain the wall schedule. That sentence did more than support my claim. It explained the entire attitude. The schedule mattered. The slope did not. My house did not. The HOA tried to distance itself next. The manager wrote that their violation notice was based only on visible exterior conditions and did not determine cause. Camille replied with the county inspection warning, the engineering reports, and a request that the violation be withdrawn pending investigation. The HOA did not answer for 4 days. Then they suspended the violation. Suspended, not withdrawn, not apologized. Just paused, as if the cracks in my wall were waiting for board review. But by then, the issue was no longer an HOA paperwork dispute. The county engineer had scheduled a site enforcement meeting, and Ridgemark's $4 million project was about to be measured against the one thing Preston could not spin. The ground itself. The enforcement meeting happened behind my fence on a gray Thursday morning. It was not dramatic at first. No courtroom, no microphones, no crowd, just damp clay, orange fencing, exposed roots, survey stakes, and a group of people standing on a hillside that had become too important for anyone to ignore. The county engineer arrived with a building inspector and an erosion control officer. Ridgemark brought Preston, their attorney, their civil engineer, their geotechnical consultant, and the excavation contractor. I came with Camille, Howard, Dr. Park, and a folder thick with photos, reports, and timelines. The county engineer began at the cut. He looked at the slope face. He looked at the missing stabilization. He looked at the wet soil near the base. He looked at the distance between the excavation and my rear foundation. Then he asked Ridgemark for the site-specific temporary shoring plan required by the earlier review comment. Their civil engineer said the final retaining wall system would stabilize the completed project. The county engineer repeated the question. Temporary shoring, not final wall, not future condition, not sales rendering. Temporary shoring for the excavation that already existed. Nobody produced it. That was the first silence. Then Dr. Park walked the county engineer through the slope movement indicators, slumped soil, exposed roots, groundwater seepage, cracking pattern, vibration timing, rainfall, and the missing support at the toe of the slope. Howard showed the interior damage and laser measurements. Camille provided the inspection note warning the contractor to install shoring or cease deep excavation. The county engineer read the note twice. Then he asked the excavation contractor whether work continued after that warning. The contractor looked at Preston. Preston looked at his attorney. The attorney said Ridgemark was reviewing sequencing decisions. That was the second silence. By noon, the county issued a stop work order for the rear excavation and retaining wall section behind the existing homes. Ridgemark had to stop all deep excavation, submit an emergency shoring plan, stabilize the exposed slope, install drainage controls, provide a third-party geotechnical review, and allow documentation of potentially affected adjacent structures. The stop work notice was posted on the construction fence. Bright orange, public, impossible to explain away. For the first time in weeks, the machine stopped because someone with authority had told them to. Then the building inspector walked through my house. He tagged the rear bedrooms for limited use until a structural repair plan was approved. I had to move into a rental for safety while engineers monitored movement. Bailey came with me, confused and restless, pacing the temporary apartment like she was looking for the house that had betrayed her. My insurance company opened the claim fully and sent a subrogation team after reviewing the county order, the inspection warning, the engineering reports, and the camera footage. They paid for temporary housing under reservation while investigating Ridgemark's liability. That meant every hotel receipt, rental invoice, engineering bill, and emergency repair estimate became part of a larger recovery file. Ridgemark tried one more public relations move. They sent nearby homeowners an update saying construction had been paused voluntarily, while the team performed additional slope improvements out of an abundance of caution. Voluntarily. That word lasted less than a day. Someone posted a photo of the county stop work order in the neighborhood group. Then another homeowner shared a screenshot of the old slope easement. Then people started asking whether their homes had been reviewed, whether pre-construction surveys had been skipped, and whether the HOA had known about the slope preservation restrictions. At the next HOA meeting, the room was full. Preston did not attend. The HOA president tried to say the association had no authority over county-permitted construction on adjacent land. Camille stood and explained that the HOA might not control Ridgemark, but it did control its own violation process. It had fined a homeowner for construction-related damage before the cause was investigated, while ignoring a recorded slope easement that affected multiple lots in the neighborhood. Then my neighbor Paul, who lived 2 doors down, said his back door had started sticking too. Another neighbor said her deck posts had shifted. A third asked whether Ridgemark had done impact documentation for any of the homes above the slope. Nobody from the HOA answered. The room understood what that meant. The board voted that night to withdraw my violation fully. They also requested an independent review of all development impacts along the rear slope and created a rule suspending appearance violations when damage was tied to active construction. County investigation or insurance review. It should not have taken my house cracking for that rule to exist. But sometimes rules are born from the exact harm they should have prevented. Ridgemark's project delay grew worse every week. The county required emergency shoring before any work could continue. The retaining wall design had to be revised. The slope drainage system had to be redesigned. Monitoring points were installed along the back lots. Howard and Dr. Park were allowed to document my foundation movement. Ridgemark's lender received notice of the stop work order. Buyers who had reserved townhomes began asking questions. The 63,500 threat disappeared. No apology came with it. Just a formal withdrawal without admission of fault. But they were not done paying. The settlement process took months. Engineering moved slower than anger. Insurance moved slower than grief. Structural repair estimates had to be reviewed, revised, challenged, and supported. But eventually Ridgemark and its insurers agreed to cover structural repairs, temporary housing, engineering fees, legal expenses, slope monitoring, landscaping restoration, fence repair, and the uncovered losses tied to the excavation damage. The final documented resolution reached $184,000. That number did not include Ridgemark's own delay losses, redesign costs, extra shoring, lost sales, or the 2 townhome units that eventually had to be removed from the plan. It was only the documented resolution for the damage to my home and property. Not because I shouted, not because I exaggerated, because every crack had a date, every vibration had a timestamp, every missing safeguard had a record, and every lie Ridgemark told had to stand next to the hillside they cut open. My house came back slowly. First came the shoring behind the fence, steel beams, timber lagging, drainage gravel, temporary pumps, and monitoring equipment that blinked at night like small red eyes along the slope. Then came the foundation work. Engineers lifted, stabilized, measured, and measured again. Cracked tile came out. Drywall was opened. Brick was repaired. The bedroom door finally closed for the first time in months. I cried when it did, not loudly, not dramatically. Just one of those small, exhausted cries that escapes before you can stop it. Bailey returned to the house before I trusted it. She walked room to room, sniffed every corner, and eventually curled up in the patch of afternoon sun beside Aaron's old cedar bench on the deck. That was when I knew we were really home. Ridgemark never finished the townhomes the way they had planned. The rear row was redesigned. 2 units were removed from the layout. The retaining wall became shorter, more expensive, and heavily monitored. The county required a permanent slope maintenance agreement, annual inspections, and recorded notices for future buyers. The lender forced Ridgemark to update its risk disclosures. Several buyers walked away. Priest and Vale was taken off the project. The company called it reassignment. The subcontractors called it something else. The excavation contractor faced county penalties for continuing work after the stabilization warning. Ridgemark's civil engineer had to submit revised documents and attend a professional review meeting. The HOA, embarrassed by its own violation notice, mailed a correction to homeowners and finally placed the slope easement map in the community records where every affected resident could see it. For months, neighbors stopped by to ask how I had found the documents. I told them the truth. Aaron had kept them. That answer always made my throat tighten. His gray file box stayed in my office after the repairs were done. I added the new reports to it. Howard's structural assessment, Dr. Park's geotechnical letter, the county stop work order, the settlement paperwork, the monitoring records, and one printed still from the backyard camera showing the deck rail trembling while the excavator hammered rock below. I kept that image because it reminded me of the thing Ridgemark tried hardest to erase. Timing. They wanted my damage to look old, random, personal, a maintenance failure, a lonely widow with an aging house looking for someone to blame. But timing told the truth. The slope was stable for 11 years. The excavation began. The trees came down. The hammering started. The rain fell. The soil moved. The house cracked. That sequence did not need emotion to be powerful. It only needed documentation. So if a developer, contractor, HOA, or neighbor ever tells you the damage to your home is just old settlement, do not accept their confidence as proof. Photograph the cracks with dates, save the weather data, pull the permits, read the easements, check the inspection notes, keep the footage, call the right engineers before anyone convinces you to patch over the evidence. And if this story made you think of someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. Leave your thoughts in the comments, save the video, and subscribe for more stories about ordinary homeowners who learned that the ground under your house is not something powerful. People get to disturb and then deny because I did not beat Ridgemark by being louder. I beat them by proving my house did not crack from age. It cracked because someone thought their schedule mattered more than the ground holding up my home, and once I measured that truth carefully enough, their arrogance became evidence.